What's up, everyone? My name is Ethan. This is Courtside TV. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and let's get into it. So today, I wanted to talk about the Utah Jazz, and this is a team that I have not talked much about this year, but obviously they have been very, very good. I just haven't felt like there's been much to say about them. They've just been killing people, chugging along, doing their thing. This is clearly a very good basketball team, but today I wanted to ask the question, can they actually win the NBA title? Because that's a point of discussion among a lot of fans, whether or not this team is a legitimate title contender despite being the number one seed in the Western Conference all season long. They have a really, really good record, and they've been killing people every single night. But some feel that they don't quite have that upside to win the title. So I kind of just wanted to talk about that and how their season has gone. So part of the reason I actually wanted to talk about them today is that they've been struggling recently. I mean, struggling relative to how well they've been playing all year, but they've actually lost 3 of their last 5. They're 2-3 in their last 5 games. Those losses include a loss to the Mavericks, a loss to the Suns in overtime, which was a really, really big game. That's, those 2 teams are right up there at the top of the Western Conference, so that could come into play for the standings. And then they just lost tonight to the Washington Wizards, and that's, obviously kind of a disappointing one, considering the Wizards are not a super good team, and the Jazz didn't play very well. Mitchell played great, but the team didn't, really come to play. They had a couple of guys out, and they ended up losing by 4. So they've been a little bit struggling recently, right? They haven't been their usual winning ways. I mean, we've seen them go through this before. They've gone through a couple of rough stretches earlier on this year, and they always seem to bounce back and just continue to win. They win like 10 in a row or whatever, and they're fine, right? So, this is nothing to be worried about in the long term, but I mean, some of these losses are kind of concerning, specifically the one to Phoenix, which now puts their record at 40-14, which is just a game and a half ahead of the Phoenix Suns for the 1 seed in the Western Conference. So they're 40-14, the Suns are 38-15, so just 1 game back in the loss column are the Suns, and they now have the tiebreaker over the Jazz. So they could potentially still get up there. It's going to be close coming down the stretch. We'll see which of those teams ends up getting hot and ends up taking that 1 seed. But a couple of these recent losses for the Jazz puts that 1 seed, which had looked kind of locked up for most of the season, that does put that in a little bit of jeopardy because the Suns are right on their heels, and the Clippers are not that far behind either. Neither are the Nuggets. So, they do still have to play out the rest of the year because they do not have anything locked up. And honestly, looking at the schedule, it's nothing too hard. They have one of the easiest schedules remaining. A couple of playoff teams here. They play the Pacers in a couple of days. They go at Lakers in Los Angeles for 2 games this coming weekend. So, who knows? Maybe LeBron and Anthony Davis are back by then. That might be a little bit rushing it, so they might catch the Lakers right before they get their stars back, but those are 2 tougher games. They do have one more game against the Suns at the end of the month. They play the Spurs twice. They play the Raptors. They play the Nuggets still. And then near the end of the season, a game against Golden State, Portland. So a couple of playoff teams there. But other than that, they have some easy ones. A couple of games against the Timberwolves. They play the Kings twice still. They play the Rockets again. So they should have some easier wins. But nothing is locked up. Like I said, they do play the Suns one more time, and that could potentially be a very big game for the 1 seed. The Suns already do hold the tiebreaker on them. So if they have the same record in terms of wins, Phoenix will be that 1 seed team. So let's get to the upside, right? Do the Jazz actually have a shot to win the title? And it's hard to tell, right? Because this is a team that relies a lot on hot 3-point shooting. They have been, I'm not sure of the exact statistics on this, if this even still holds true, but for most of the season, the Jazz have been the best 3-point shooting team in the league. They got a lot of guys who can hit shots. Their offense does a good job of putting guys in positions to hit those open shots. They have a lot of guys who are, constantly open, and they have a lot of guys who can hit them. Like I said, Mike Conley, Donovan Mitchell, Jordan Clarkson, Joe Ingles, you can go down the list of all these Jazz rotation players, Bogdanovich, tons of them. They can all, at least hit open shots other than Gobert, who we know is not a floor stretcher. So they have a lot of guys who can hit open shots, and they've taken more threes than anybody. I think that's still true, as they have, the highest 3-point rate in the league. So they've just been, chucking up all these threes, and they're hitting them, and that works, right? We know that works in modern basketball. If you can hit more threes, you're probably going to do pretty well. And then also with their defense, right? We know Rudy Gobert might be the defensive player of the year. He's already won it twice. Could be, a 3rd-time winner this season. And we know him as a guy who has a huge defensive impact at that center spot. He can really change the way opposing teams try to do their scoring attack just based on his presence inside the paint. They have a lot of other good team defenders as well. Specifically, like Joe Ingles is a pretty good defender. Even Bogdanovich can be at points. You have Royce O'Neal, who is is known as one of those hard-nosed guys. Donovan Mitchell has the body to be a good defender. He's a little bit inconsistent at times. Mike Conley is a good defender. So they have a really good defense and lots of guys who can lock up on you. So that's the thing, right? It's three-point shooting and defense, and you combine those two and you got a really good basketball team. And that's just what the Jazz are. They execute well. They do all the little things, and it's just a very solid team. They have a lot of guys who know their role and play well together. So the question with them is, do they have a superstar? And the answer is probably not. And the bad news for the Jazz is that you pretty much have to have a superstar on your team to win the NBA title. I mean, we can look through recent history. All the teams over the past, 6-7 years have had Steph Curry, LeBron, or Kawhi on them, and Kevin Durant obviously counts in that as well. You can go back even further, talking about like the Celtics from 2008 with Kevin Garnett, or the Mavericks with Dirk Nowitzki in 2011, and like Kobe Bryant teams with Shaquille O'Neal, or so you're looking at teams that have to have a top 5 player in the entire league, top 5, maybe top 6 at worst. You just have to have a guy who is up there with the greats to really win the title. I mean, I don't even know the last time there was a team like that. You can maybe look at some of the early 2000s Pistons teams, but other than that, it's really just, teams that have a top 5 player on their roster are the ones that win the title. And the Jazz, regardless of what you think about Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, I think we can all agree that neither of them are that, right? Both of them maybe have an argument for top 10, although I would probably disagree with that. I think they're more in the top 15, top 20 range, both of them in terms of, players in the league. But neither of them are top 5. I think even Jazz fans would agree that neither of those players are a top 5 player in the NBA. So if they don't have a top 5 player, then how are they going to win the title? Well, it's because they have a really good team. They have a deep roster. They have an 8-man rotation that they can play, and they can put a ton of guys on the floor who don't suck, right? You hear that, shout out Chris Vernon on that one, of does the team have to play guys who suck? And there's a lot of teams in the league that don't have enough good players, so in their rotation, sometimes they have to use guys who suck. And the Jazz don't have to do that. They have, 8 or 9 players that they can play in their rotation that are all good, solid NBA players, and none of them suck. And that's where their strength is, right? Like I said, they have 2 guys who are probably in the top 20 in Mitchell and Gobert. You have a couple of other guys who are, teetering on that edge of borderline all-stars, guys like specifically Mike Conley, and you can even go down to guys who I think are really, really good in Bogdan Bogdanovic and Joe Ingles. Sorry, that's Bojan Bogdanovic, wrong Bogdanovic there, but you know what I mean, right? Derek Favors, Jordan Clarkson. So they've got a lot of good players, right? But they don't have any superstars, and that's where the discrepancy is of whether or not they can actually do this thing. So ultimately where I come down on this is, according to all of the metrics and all of the eye test stuff, the Jazz should be a contender, right? If you look at all of the three-point shooting stats, they have the best record in the league, they have a really good defense. So if you look at all that stuff, you're like, yeah, this team should probably be considered in the title mix, just because look at all these numbers, and the numbers don't lie, and they tell you that the Jazz are a very good basketball team. But if you look at, maybe some of the intangibles stuff in terms of leadership and not having a top 5 player on your roster, you might have to second guess that, because if just looking at the history of who wins rings in the NBA, it is very, very unlikely that a team constructed like this will be able to win a title. I think really the last example of it would probably be the Pistons, and I think 2004 were the last team to really have like a similar vibe to this Jazz team and actually pull off the NBA title. So obviously it's not impossible, right? It can be done, but it's probably pretty unlikely. And considering some of the competition they have with a team like the Nuggets, who Jokic is playing like a top 5 player this year. You can argue about whether or not he's in that conversation. Obviously, the Lakers with LeBron and Anthony Davis, who are both up there. The Clippers have Kawhi Leonard, who's up there. Even the Suns, I think I trust them a little bit more, just because I feel like Chris Paul, even though he's not a top 5 player, he's really, really good. And they also have Devin Booker, who I think that duo is probably a little better than Mitchell and Gobert. And the Suns, I just seem to trust them in a playoff setting, not necessarily to win a title, unless a lot breaks their way. But if the two matched up, I would maybe lean Phoenix. And like I said, with LeBron and Kawhi and all that. And then if you look at the Eastern Conference, you're talking about, Giannis and the Bucks, and Joel Embiid with the Sixers, and of course the Brooklyn Nets with Kyrie and James Harden and KD. So all of those teams out there, right? All of them have, a better player than the Jazz do. And you can even go further down the standings if you're talking about upsets. You can look at the Warriors with Steph Curry. You could look at the Mavericks with Luka Doncic. So there's a couple of teams down there that have superstars that the Jazz don't have. So that's my concern, right? Not saying that they can't win the title, but just based on precedent, it seems pretty unlikely unless Mitchell, does a thing like he did last postseason, but does it consistently and levels it up even further, where in the first round he was averaging like 50 points, but the team still didn't win. So he's going to have to do that again, and have the rest of the team also support him. So unless Mitchell takes a huge jump and becomes a superstar this postseason, I just think that it's pretty unlikely that the Utah Jazz are actually able to win a title this year. Not saying they're a bad team. I think they can get to the conference finals at least. But yeah, that's ultimately where I come down on this. But yeah, I think that's about all I have on the Utah Jazz. Like I said at the top of the video, if you're new, don't forget to subscribe. Leave a like, ring the bell if you want to. Leave a comment letting me know what you guys think about the Jazz. Can they actually win the title? Would love to hear your thoughts down below. But yeah, with all that said, I will see you guys in the next one.